Matthew 5, verse 13. Jesus says, "You are the salt of the earth, but if salt has lost its taste, how can its saltiness be restored? It is no longer good for anything, but is thrown out and trampled underfoot." When we think of salt today, we think of something that's pretty inexpensive. You can buy a container of salt for just a few cents. But we need to remember that in Jesus' day, salt was an extremely valuable commodity. Looking back over history, a remarkable historical fact is that more wars throughout history have been fought over salt than over gold. So salt was very, very precious at the time when Jesus uttered these words. It wasn't some cheap substance that we think of today. Salt was very expensive and very important. In Israel, the famous Dead Sea is literally in Hebrew Yam HaMelech, which means the salt sea. And here's a picture of that. And you can see the shores of the Dead Sea, and you can see the salt along those shores in the upper left-hand slide. And our normal sea is about 3% salt water. The Dead Sea is about 33% salt water. So it's 10 times what a normal body of water, what a normal sea would be. But it has an abundant supply of salt and minerals that are mined from this water. And a lot of people who have skin diseases will go to the shores of the Dead Sea and wrap themselves in those minerals to have some healing and relief for their condition. And today when we think of salt, we think of the great enhancement that salt gives, the great flavor that it adds to our meals. And some things are just better when you put salt on it, aren't they? A lot of things. Some of us like it a little more than others. But salt adds so much flavor. It makes things taste different, doesn't it? It enhances so much because the salt is so different from the food on which it's placed. The contrast there between the salt and the food is what makes that great difference. In Jesus' day, salt was an absolute necessity of life. Yes, it was expensive, but it was also necessary because the first and foremost use of salt was as a preservative. As a preservative. Of course, this was centuries before refrigeration was invented. So great amounts of salt were needed to preserve meats and to preserve fish and other types of food so that they would not spoil. And we know of successful fishing industries based in the Galilee, where Jesus was from, in Jesus' day. And they would heavily salt their fish and prepare them for use in faraway places like Jerusalem. So Jesus' words here are not only aimed at adding flavor to our world, and of course they are, but more importantly, I think, that preservative aspect, that preventing decay and stopping corruption. And we can think of so many examples in our world where Christians have stepped up to the plate and made the difference in dire situations. And certainly we are facing one of those situations in our city, even at this hour. When Jesus said the salt loses its saltiness, in the Greek, it's more literal as that salt is defiled. Not just that it's become unsalty, but that it's defiled. Salt, in and of itself, isn't technically prone to losing its flavor, is it? But if it is mixed with something that is impure, then it will become worthless as a preservative. And unsalty salt is not worth anything, is it? It's pretty worthless. But as Christians, we can look at what Jesus is saying here and ask ourselves, is it possible for we as Christians to lose our focus? If it wasn't possible, I don't think Jesus would warn us about it. So yes, it is possible. But if we lose our focus, what happens to those around us that God has literally planted us within their midst with his great commission to spread the gospel? What happens to those around us? if we lose our focus. We don't have time to be distracted from this mission. And again, this is so relevant to the hour in which we're living, because God is going to be dropping opportunity after opportunity for us to be salt to this world and to this city, to our circle of influence. Every one of us knows someone that has been impacted. Those of you with military experience, you could tell us a lot about the dire consequences that occur when a mission doesn't go the way it should. People suffer. People are lost in the process. And may that never be said of us. May we keep our focus on that mission that Jesus has entrusted us with. When Jesus speaks of salt being trampled underneath the feet, it is said that in the temple in Jerusalem, in the area where the sacrifices were made. Of course, sacrifices were made continually and continually and continually there in the temple. Salt was sprinkled on the floor to absorb that blood so that those coming in to offer sacrifices wouldn't slip on all of that blood in the floor. And that's not a very glorious use for such a precious and expensive commodity, is it? In the same way, we as believers, if we lose our saltiness, then we are relegating ourselves to a purpose that is beneath God's perfect plan. Salt could be so much more than being trampled under feet by those in the temple. Another feature of salt is that it promotes thirst, doesn't it? We as believers should live in such a way in this world that those on the outside will become thirsty for the kingdom of God, that they will thirst for more and to know God more. Over the last 2 weeks in this series, the Beatitudes have been discussed. So right now, on the heels of these wonderful Beatitudes, these blessings that Jesus gives, Jesus says these astounding words that we, as his followers, we are salt. And then he goes on to say,